I don't talk about other candidates. Why? Because the challenges that Michigan faces right now, Brad, are bigger than any one of us.
Hello and welcome to The Moment. I'm Brad LaPlante, political reporter for WLNS, and each week I invite one of Michigan's most influential players in politics from Lansing and beyond to find out how they are shaping the current era we live in. This week has been a crazy one in politics. It was Election Day on Tuesday, and Democrats swept all major elections. Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani won the New York City mayoral election against Independent Andrew Cuomo. In Virginia, Democrat Abigail Spanberger won the governor's race against Republican Winsome Earl Sears. And in New Jersey, Democrat Mikey Sherrill defeated Republican Jack Ciattarelli. Prop 50, the redistricting efforts to redraw the maps in California, also passed to combat redistricting efforts by Republicans in Texas. And in Georgia, Democrats won 2 elections for the Public Service Commission. It was the largest margin of victory for Democrats in a Georgia statewide election in more than 30 years. Mary Sheffield was also elected as Detroit's first female mayor in the city's history. She defeated the popular Reverend Solomon Kinloch to win. And here in Michigan's capital, Andy Shore won re-election for a third term, defeating progressive Kelsey Hector by a wide margin. My guest today is actually going to be Republican Michigan governor candidate Tom Leonard. He is the former Speaker of the House in Michigan and a DeWitt native. And I wanted to have Leonard on because he thinks that Republicans should focus more on policy and results instead of blaming Democrats. And given the election results this week, I thought it would be a good idea to bring him in for a chat to see what he thinks and his reactions are to the election and what he thinks could move Michigan forward. Here is my interview with Tom Leonard. You've said that you want to make Michigan a growth state. I'm just curious, what does that look like for you and how would you implement that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, when you look at the state of our state right now, Brad, the only state that Michigan beat for population growth the first 2 decades of this century was West Virginia. We are currently 48 out of 50 in unemployment, bottom 10 for income growth. And I think one of the most damning statistics that we're looking at right now is the fact that only 75% of our fourth graders can read at a proficient level. So I've been very clear that I want to make Michigan a growth state again. Where do we start? There are several things that we need to do. First and foremost, we need to make Michigan a right to work state again. When you look at 9 of the top 10 growth states in this country, 9 of the 10 are right to work. Number 2, our plan calls for a phase out, a 5-year phase out of the state income tax. 6 of the top 10 growth states right now have either a substantially lower income tax rate than Michigan or no income tax rate at all. And in fact, Indiana, they've begun the process. They started the process of phasing their income tax out. So if we don't get on this, we're going to continue to lose our young loved ones just south of the border. And last, and I've made this one of my top priorities. I had a reporter a couple of weeks ago ask me if there's one thing that we can accomplish when I'm the state's next governor, what would I want it to be? And that is addressing this third grade reading crisis that we have. Again, 75% of our fourth graders cannot read at a proficient level. That is a crisis. As a former prosecutor, I can tell you this. If a child cannot read and they have to drop out of school, you've created a pipeline to a welfare check or a prison cell. We've got to address this crisis. Companies aren't going to want to move here and they're not going to want to expand here if they know we're going to have an illiterate working base 10 to 15 years from now. We've got to address that crisis.
What does that look like for addressing education and making sure that, they can read?
Look no further than the Mississippi Miracle. So what did Mississippi do? 10 years ago, they were 49 out of 50 in their third grade reading scores. And with the right reforms, within 10 years, they are now top 10. So what did their reforms do? Number one, target or early assessment. So every kindergartner, first grader, second grader, and third grader, 3 assessments per year so they could easily identify and early identify, most importantly, which kids were struggling. Number 2, targeted support. They invested in high quality tutors to get them into those classrooms and help those teachers. I mean, I've been very clear. If a teacher has a classroom with 30 kids in there, they are not going to be able to spend enough time on each of them to make certain that they can read at a proficient level. They've got to have those tutors in there, that high quality support. Number three, in their legislation, they drew a line in the sand and they said, listen, if a child cannot read proficiently, we can no longer just pass them on to the fourth grade. We've got to hold them back. But they said, if we're going to do this, number four, we have to empower parents in this process. We've got to make certain that there's better communication. We've got to make certain that they're part of this, but we also got to make certain that there's every resource available. So for instance, if the child has to take summer school, the school made certain that there was transportation. So again, Mississippi did this. And the reason I love what they've done here with this Mississippi miracle is the fact that Mississippi is a poorer state than Michigan is, and they spend far less on education. So it's not just about the dollars. If you implement the right reforms with the right leadership, you can make certain that your kids are reading again. Mississippi did it. We can do it here in Michigan.
So I'm wondering too, because Mike Duggan, who is also running right as an independent, he came out and said, Michigan's education system is broken. And that kind of seems like a lot of what I'm hearing from you as well. Duggan believes, with certain goals that Michigan could become a top 25 state for literacy in 5 years, top 10 in 10, kind of like you're saying with, Mississippi, what Mississippi did. Now, do you think that you differ from Duggan's plan? I mean, he has said that Michigan schools should have an education goal, education goals in mind. Some of his plan even outlines hey, if you aren't hitting these metrics, we're going to fire the superintendent. Are you that extreme, or at what point where's the crisis at for you?
Yeah. So I do know one. So I haven't looked at his entire platform, but I know one big difference in opinion we have at least had in the past is I remember he really wanted to, regulate more stringently, if you will, and put a substantial burden on charter schools. And I am a much bigger proponent of parental choice in making certain that they have those choices. So I think that's one area where we would differ. But, in terms of accountability, our plan right here in the path forward, it also calls for merit pay for teachers. So as a Republican, and you often don't hear this from Republicans, I'm not afraid to say I believe Michigan ought to have the highest paid teachers in the country. But they shouldn't be the highest paid teachers in the country just because they got another step increase and they've been there for another year. We ought to reward the great ones and we ought to get rid of the bad ones. So merit pay is certainly part of our platform. Another thing, these third grade reading scores. You wouldn't believe the number of parents that I talk to and they think, oh, well, the problem is only in Detroit or Flint. There are problems there, but you know what? Your average school district that a lot of parents, they just don't understand where they send their kid are well below where the standards need to be. So our plan also calls for making certain that those third grade reading scores are put on the front of every school district's website and also put up in a common area. I mean, imagine if a parent walked into a common area, into the gymnasium or whatever, and it said right there in bright letters, this school, in this school district, only 42% of the kids can read at a proficient level. So it calls for more transparency as well. But we've also, I believe school choice should also focus on curriculum as well. We've got a skilled trade shortage in this state. We've got to make certain that we're facilitating kids that want to go into the trades. I believe we need more flexibility with the merit curriculum, more flexibility with the dollars. So if a child in their junior or senior year, if they want to go to a trade school, why hold them into a high school and force them to take classes they're never going to utilize? Let's let them use those dollars and go to a trade school and start getting certified immediately.
What are those classes that I'm just curious. What are those classes that they won't use?
Making them take extra foreign language classes that they're not going to use, or physical education classes. I mean, if you've got an 18-year-old senior and there's a trade school down the road and they want to become, they want to get their apprenticeship and, become a pipe fitter or an electrician or a plumber, why force them to stay in that school building for for another year taking gym classes they're never going to use in the future, or taking another math class they're not going to use, or another foreign language class, when they could be going down the street and they could start getting certified immediately, not just helping them, obtain a gainful career, but helping us as a state because we need more people to be in the trades.
As part of your growth plan, you also want to restore Michigan as a right to work state, as you've said. These and some of the results vary. I've seen, studies that have said that policies can reduce unionization pretty much across the board and show mixed wage effects. But I'm wondering, Michigan is a big manufacturing state, right? And a lot of that history is unionization. Now, I'm wondering, don't these right to work policies, don't they kind of, restrict unions or weaken their leverage?
No, in fact, what these right to work laws do is they empower workers. You think about this for just a moment. If somebody hires into a union shop and they have to join that union as a condition of employment, then there is no accountability with the union leadership because they don't have to work on behalf of those workers' behalf because they know they have to join regardless. If Michigan is a right to work state and that worker has a choice, that means that union leadership, they have to wake up every single day. They have to prove their worth for that worker to be in that union. They have to work their tails off. They got to make certain that union is effective. When I look at right to work, I believe it empowers workers more than it empowers anybody.
And so you're thinking that making Michigan a right to work state will attract more workers to the state just in general across the board?
I don't just think, I know. I mean, the stats are there. Again, 9 of the top 10 growth states. And when right to work, think about this for just a moment. When right to work was repealed in the state of Michigan, the day the governor signed the repeal, Michigan was 36 out of 50 for our unemployment rate. And we were right at the national average in terms of number and percentage. Okay, now 36 out of 50 is not good enough, but it's much better than the 48 out of 50 that we are now and the 1.4% off of the national average that we are now. So the stats are there. The proof is in the pudding, if you will. Ever since right to work got repealed, Michigan has done nothing but decline for unemployment. And the day that I remember when they were doing the hearings, there were companies that testified and said, listen, there are companies around the country will not even consider a state if that state is not a right to work state. This is something we need to get done. Again, it won't just make us a growth state again. It's not just better for the economy, but it's better for the individual worker. It empowers them and it forces the union to go and work on their behalf every single day.
We just had an election, right? One of the biggest talking points, takeaways, people are very frustrated with the economy, the cost of, inflation, things like that. And people, whether or not it's true or not, right? People associate a lot of Trump's tariff policies with the economy. They're going, maybe if they're down on their luck, maybe they are just going to blame, whoever's in power. Republican, Biden had that issue, right? When he was running for president, and then obviously Harris, Democrats had to convince the public that, the economy is not as bad or as people thought it was. Now Republicans are in power, right? And we're starting to kind of see a shift back towards Democrats in the very small sample size of elections that we had this week. I want to ask first about Trump's tariff policies. And there's a big tariff. Last I checked, it was 25% on automobiles, some auto parts. Michigan's a big tariff state, and that's in addition to a baseline 10% tariff. Do you agree with these tariff policies and, what that might mean for Michigan workers?
Yeah, I mean, we have been ripped off for so many years with these policies that are out of balance and they favor, places like China. I certainly agree with the concept and what he is trying to do. But the question I've been asking, and this came up at our Republican debate last night, a question very similar. And I said, I think the question that we need to be asking here in the state of Michigan is this. What happens if and when the Trump policies work and thousands of manufacturing jobs come back to the United States? Will those companies choose Michigan? And what I would argue is when you've got a tax structure that is not as competitive as other states, when you've got a regulatory structure that's not as competitive as other states, when you're not a right to work state, I believe that those companies are going to choose southern states like Florida and Texas and Kentucky, and again, maybe even Indiana or Ohio. So we've got to make Michigan as competitive as we can to ensure that when those tariffs do work and manufacturing comes back, and I believe you're already starting to see it. I mean, you've looked at some of these companies like Apple have already said they're going to start investing billions here. General Motors, I mean, they're reopening a plant here. I believe they are going to work, but we've got to make certain that we've got the right policies in place to ensure that these companies are going to choose Michigan, not some other state.
If taxes were actually lowered, what can Michigan do to keep roads, schools, public services operational without losing some of those programs that people rely on?
Yeah, you've got to do just like Florida and Texas has. They have much larger surpluses than we have here in Michigan, and they've got lower taxes. Why? Because people are moving there because of the policies that have been put in effect. And that's what I want to do. I want to make Michigan more competitive so that our young ones will come back here and that our young ones will stay here. If you want to have a solid budget, you don't do it by taxing people out of the state. You do it by growing the pie and making certain that we have more taxpayers here. And that's what my goal is. And I believe if Michigan were to eliminate the income tax, I mean, I can't tell you the number of people. I've made calls trying to find support from people across the state. And I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody say, they'll kind of chuckle and they'll say, hey, I'm no longer a resident in Michigan. I moved to Florida. There's no income tax there. I couldn't afford to stay in Michigan. So, the bottom line is we've got to make certain that we grow the pie, that we have more taxpayers here. That's how you do it. It's not by taxing our current residents out of the state.
You've pushed for stronger transparency in government. You just mentioned about the Whitmer. I think you've talked before also in separate interviews about, making the executive branch in Michigan subject to FOIA. Now, I'm wondering, because according to my research, you are still a registered lobbyist in Lansing. Some people see this as a conflict of interest. I'm wondering if you see it that way.
No, I think what I've done over the last 7 years is I've given a voice to what I call the voiceless. I mean, my first client when I came to Lansing was the American Bail Coalition. So you had these left-wing groups from California wanting to go get rid of cash bail in the state of Michigan and implement this system like they did in San Francisco and New York City that did nothing but drive up crime. They wanted representation, and I had an opportunity to represent them. Homeschoolers. There was a time where there were legislators pushing a homeschool registry. It was going to burden homeschoolers across the state. And they asked me to represent them, pushing back on corporate welfare. I've represented companies that have done that. I represent a company that protects gun rights in the state of Michigan. What I've done over the last 6-7 years is I've given a voice to those that didn't have a voice under complete Democrat control. I was happy to do it, and I'm proud of the work that we've done.
But I guess I'm also wondering too, do you see, because even if, your intentions are fine and there's no, I'm not going to call it corruption, but even if your intentions are good, I guess I'm just wondering if you are concerned about the perception of a conflict of interest in that regard.
No, because I've been very open and transparent. I've never hid from anything, and I believe transparency is key and transparency is best. And, we are the one campaign on either side of the aisle. One of the most staggering statistics that I've seen since I got in this race is the fact that 2/3 of the voters in this state no longer trust state government. And something that we did even before we introduced our policy platform is we introduced an ethics and accountability package. And what would this do? It would call for opening the executive and the legislature up to FOIA. We are one of 2 states, I believe, across the country where our citizens don't have access to the records of the executive branch. That is wrong. We need to fix that. It calls for getting state employees back into the office. It calls for putting salaries online. It calls for banning any fundraising during a session day or a day where there's committee. We shouldn't even have the perception of pay to play. So again, we're the one campaign that's put together an ethics and accountability package. It's been very well received. I've always been transparent about my background, what I do. And again, I've given a voice in Lansing to the voiceless, those that didn't basically didn't have people that wanted to represent them. I've done it. I've been successful, and I've been very happy and excited about the work that we've done.
I'm sure you've been following, right? Democrats made a lot of gains by focusing significantly on affordability and the cost of living. And one takeaway is that Democrats in this election were more motivated than Republicans to come out and vote, just based on the margins of victory in Virginia, in New Jersey. Are you concerned about Trump not being on the ballot? Like, how can Republicans get voters out to vote when Trump isn't there?
So there is no doubt that we have to motivate Trump voters to get back out. And I've done that before. I mean, I am the only statewide Republican in the last 10 years that's won Macomb County without Donald Trump being on the ballot. In 2018, I was the only candidate that won Saginaw County, Macomb County, Kent County, Eaton County, Isabella County, and Leelanau County. These are all bellwether counties that Republicans have to win. So you're right. We've got to make certain that we put a candidate on the ballot that can speak to those voters in the middle and independent voters, but also speak to the Trump base. And that's exactly what we've done. And I've been very clear. And I've been very transparent with Republicans about this. Our campaign is about a positive vision every single day. I don't talk about other candidates. Why? Because the challenges that Michigan faces right now, Brad, are bigger than any one of us. And I've been very clear. Last November, Democrats gave the entire state, the entire country, a playbook for what happens when you wake up every single day, you're void of a vision, you don't know what you stand for, and every day your focus is hatred of one person, you lose. And Republicans are not immune to that. And I've been very clear, if we wake up every day and our only focus is Jocelyn Benson or Gretchen Whitmer, we lose. We have to present a positive vision focused on solving problems with real solutions every day. And again, that's what we did with the Path Forward. If you go to the front of our website, tomformichigan.com, it is right there for the world to see. We've been transparent. That's our positive vision. And I call it the Dan Campbell approach. The coach of the Lions. You think about this for just a moment. When he became coach of the Lions and he stood there at that first press conference, he didn't focus on 6 decades of failure. He didn't point the finger. He didn't cast blame. He just said, with a lot of grit, a lot of determination, and a positive vision, we're going to turn this program around. If he could do that with the Detroit Lions, we can do the same thing here in the state of Michigan, but it requires leadership going out there every single day and doing it.
And that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you in the first place, is mostly that message. I can't remember where I saw it. It must have been a press release or something where
I'm glad it got out. You did.
Well, and I'm wondering because or at least the reason it stood out to me is because it seems like it's a refreshing message in the Republican Party right now, because I think there's a lot of critics. There are a lot of critics on, both sides, I think, where they see Washington as broken. And I know you're not running for Senate. Of course, you can't speak to, the problems that Washington might have. But you're seeing it kind of play out in real time with Marjorie Taylor Greene and her frustrations with the Republican Party leadership right now, where she is basically going on, some people have called it a revenge tour, but she's basically going on this thing like, hey, there is something to this healthcare thing. Like, we need to, healthcare prices are going up for my constituents, and these are the people that I represent. These are the people that elect me. And it doesn't seem like Republicans have solutions to the healthcare affordability crisis. And, she's concerned with that. And so I guess I'm just wondering if, what you think about just maybe it's not healthcare. Maybe it's, what do you think the Republican Party needs to do to, message to voters that you guys do have solutions, instead of focusing on, it's Democrats that aren't making the government work. It's, Democrats, but now that Republicans are in power, they have to do something, because there's not really anyone that you can pass the blame to now.
Absolutely. And we have to be out there, and whoever we as Republicans nominate, we better nominate somebody who not only has that positive vision and that plan, but isn't afraid to take it anywhere in the state. I mean, to Donald Trump's credit, last election cycle, There was no place he was afraid to go and take his message. And that's how we've got to be this cycle, whether that be Dearborn, Lansing, Detroit, the Upper Peninsula. We've got to be willing to go everywhere. And that's exactly where I've been. I mean, listen, Brad, when I've given this story often, when I was a prosecutor, probably the proudest moment I ever had was when this young man, I was called into this case, this matter, and this young man, 17 years old, he'd been charged as an adult, 3 10-year felonies. And basically what he had done is he shot these other 3 young men at a bus stop in the north end of Flint. And I was asked by his attorney to go talk to him. I spent over an hour with him, and this kid's in tears. He's shackled. He was handcuffed. He was shackled to the ground. And he said, sir, everything in that police report is 100% accurate. But what's not in there is this. The fact that what I did that day was in self-defense. And I don't know what to do because it's 3 people's word on one. I'm going to go to prison for 10 years and my life is ruined. And I had my officer go back out and check to see if there was any video surveillance. And 4 hours later, he returned. He had this DVD and he said, you're not going to believe it. Everything this young man said is 100% true. We popped it in and you could see it was in self-defense. Within an hour, we had him out of jail. We had the other 3 arrested for falsifying a police report. The reason I tell that story is this. As I travel the state, I meet senior citizens that are terrified that they're not going to be able to stay in their homes because of the rising cost of property taxes. I'm meeting young adults that don't know if they can get married because of the rising cost of property taxes. I'm talking to people that have kids in school that they don't even know if their kid's getting educated. And frankly, they're fed up, they're tired, and they don't want a candidate to show up and blame other people. They want you to show up, they want you to listen, and they want you to get to work attacking the problem. And that's exactly what we've done in this campaign. And that's what I'm going to do when I'm the state's next governor. We're going to be a solutions-focused campaign and a solutions-focused governor with a positive vision every day, solving problems. That's what people in the state want.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Thank you for listening and watching The Moment. New episodes air every Friday on WLNS.com, the WLNS YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. And that's it. Have a great week.